I remember the moment things began to shift, not with a bang, but with a strange silence that didn't belong. It was a Wednesday, one of those midweek grinds where the house feels like it's running on rails, lunch is packed, laundry folded, kids dropped off, emails firing in from work. Predictable, methodical. That day, she told me she was going straight from school drop-off to meet with her PTA committee for a 3-hour planning session. I nodded, kissed her cheek, and watched her leave in her usual flurry, oversized tote bag, meticulously styled hair, that tight smile she wore when she was on. What stuck with me, though, was the way she paused at the front door. She stood there, frozen for just a moment, her hand on the doorknob like she'd forgotten something but didn't want to admit it. I asked if she needed anything, and she gave me a look, flat, blank, like she hadn't expected me to still be there. Then she smiled too quickly, shook her head, and left. It was nothing, and yet it wasn't. Later that afternoon, I was in the garage looking for the power drill. It wasn't where I usually kept it. I started checking other drawers, cabinets. I opened the one we rarely use, the one with half-empty paint cans and dead batteries. That's when I saw it, a school fundraiser gift bag, one of those overly decorated ones with shiny blue tissue paper peeking out. Except it wasn't supposed to be there. Those bags are always prepped and brought in by the PTA moms, my wife included, and this one was personalized. To Coach Kevin, thanks for always going the extra mile. From PTA Chair Lauren, my wife's name. Kevin was the school's new track coach. Young, tall, smiled like he'd never been punched in the gut by life. He started this semester and had already become a minor celebrity among the other moms. I stared at the bag for a long time, feeling the floor tilt just slightly under me. The card was taped to the outside. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. Inside, it wasn't a generic note. It was handwritten, familiar cursive with those annoying little hearts she dots her eyes with. I know this doesn't even begin to thank you for everything you've done for me these past few weeks. You've made even the worst days feel worth waking up for. Just know I notice. I see you. L. My body didn't react the way I thought it would. No spike of rage. No shouting. Just cold. A slow, hollow cold that started in my chest and radiated outward like frost spreading across glass. I read the note again. For me. Not for the kids. Not for the PTA. For her. She was thanking him for making her days worth waking up for. My wife, the woman who hadn't touched me in 2 months, who had become expert at weaponizing exhaustion, who had started sleeping with her phone under her pillow. I put the note back in the envelope. My hands didn't shake. I was too far past anger for that. That evening, she came home exactly on schedule. Smile tight. Breath mint strong. She asked how my day was performative interest, and I told her it was fine. I watched her unpack groceries she clearly hadn't bought herself, a half-baked lie about swinging by the store after the meeting. There were receipts in the bag, but they were from a gas station. That was the first crack. A small lie. A stupid one. But lies are like termites. You see one, you know there's a colony chewing away somewhere beneath the surface. She was acting. I could feel it now, as clearly as I could hear her heels clicking across the kitchen tile. Everything she said, everything she did, it all had a brittle rehearsed edge. That night, I went through her car while she was in the shower. I didn't find much, just a spare gym towel in the trunk that didn't smell like sweat but like her perfume. Who takes perfume to the gym? But the real kicker was her planner. My wife is a control freak, the kind of person who uses color-coded pins to schedule things like call mom and order more printer ink. I flipped through the week. PTA meeting, 10 a.m., marked in blue. Below it, in faint pencil, barely visible, were 2 initials, K at one. That was it. No address. No other details. Just a private, delicate little marker for something she clearly didn't want anyone else to see. It wasn't just the secrecy that got to me, it was the audacity. She thought she was smarter than me. She thought I wouldn't notice. I didn't confront her. I didn't scream. I didn't beg for answers. That would have given her control. Instead, I laid in bed beside her, listening to her breathe. Slow. Steady. Like someone with nothing to hide. My mind was wide awake, already moving at 1,000 miles an hour. She wanted to keep playing pretend? Fine. Let her. Let her decorate the mask a little more. Because now I was done pretending too. And I don't think she had the faintest idea what she had just woken up in me. Our life was, from the outside, almost enviable. The kind of quiet domestic rhythm people envy without understanding its cost. We had the house with the soft gray shutters, the matching SUVs, the occasional beach vacation we document just enough to let others know we were thriving, not enough to seem like we were trying too hard. She baked on Sundays. I mowed the lawn with wireless headphones in. We hosted couples game nights and kept a shared calendar color-coded for school functions, vet appointments, and her wine nights with the girls. For years, I thought we were solid. Not passionate, not wild, but stable. She had her space, I had mine, and the silence between us was the kind you get used to, the kind you stop questioning. If she seemed distracted sometimes, I chalked it up to stress. If she forgot to say, "I love you," before hanging up, I figured she was in a rush. That's the danger of routine. You stop seeing the erosion until the foundation caves in beneath you. It started with her energy. She'd come home glowing, as if lit from within. Not just content, but high on something invisible. Her laugh got lighter, freer. Her wardrobe subtly changed, nothing dramatic, just slightly tighter shirts, more care in how she did her hair before casual errands. I remember noticing how often she reapplied lip gloss in the mirror by the door before heading out. I teased her once, "Who are you trying to impress?" And she rolled her eyes and said, "Myself? God, you sound like a jealous dad." She said it with a smirk, but something about the way she didn't look me in the eye stuck with me. She started using new words, phrases I'd never heard from her before. Emotional bandwidth. Protecting my peace. I need to explore what makes me feel alive. I'd ask, "Are you okay?" And she'd answer with things that weren't answers. "I'm working on my boundaries. I'm discovering parts of myself I didn't know I needed." It felt like I was speaking to a stranger wrapped in the skin of the woman I married. But she still kissed me goodnight. Still texted me reminders about garbage day. Still smiled at the neighbors. So I told myself not to overthink it. She's evolving, I told myself. People change. Maybe she just needed a little space. Then came the first contradiction. She said she was meeting her friend Kelsey for brunch, sounded innocent enough. But I found Kelsey's Instagram post later that day, a tagged photo of her in Vegas, posing with some flaming cocktail by a rooftop pool. That small crack, that lie, echoed louder in my head than I wanted it to. I didn't bring it up. I wanted to see if she'd correct herself, slip, or say anything at all. She didn't. She came home that night humming some song, dropped her keys on the table like nothing was off, and kissed me on the cheek with lips that tasted faintly of a different perfume than she usually wore. A sharper scent, one I'd never smelled on her before. I sat there, watching her sort through the mail, and realized I was holding my breath. Soon, her phone was always face down. Her lock screen notifications disappeared. She changed her password, told me she had to for work compliance. Her social media slowly began to vanish from my feed. I couldn't find her Instagram stories anymore. She'd removed me from the close friends list without a word. Her location sharing stopped. When I asked her about it, she said, "I'm trying to be less attached to tech. Too much tracking feels invasive." That would have sounded wise from anyone else. From her, it was a wall being built. I watched it go up, brick by brick, while she smiled at me across the dinner table and asked about my day like everything was fine. The purchases started next. A hotel charge in a part of town she had no reason to be in. She said it was for a friend's bridal shower planning meeting. It ran late, she said, not looking up from her phone. We just got a room to crash in. I almost believed her. I wanted to, but I knew her friends. They'd never spend that kind of money on a hotel just to plan a party. A silk scarf I'd never seen her wear before appeared in her closet. New lingerie tucked behind old pajamas. I found a gym membership card in her purse for a boutique studio she never mentioned joining. When I asked about it, she blinked like she forgot it was there. "Oh, it's just a trial. Haven't even gone yet." But the edges of the card were already worn. I looked at her and didn't recognize the calm tone in her voice. Too smooth. Too practiced. I kept telling myself these were coincidences. That she was just stressed, redefining herself, doing what modern women do when they hit their mid-30s and panic about time slipping by. But deep down, I knew. Not from any one thing, but from all of it combined. The absence. The vague smiles. The curated distance. Her growth was no longer a path we walked together. It was a cliff edge she kept inching toward while I was kept safely inland, out of view. And yet, I didn't confront her. Not yet. Because the part of me that still loved her, maybe even the part of me that feared being alone, clung to the illusion. I told myself, maybe she's just figuring herself out. Maybe this is a phase. Maybe if I give her space, she'll find her way back. But a deeper part, colder and quieter, had already started taking notes. Not panicking. Not planning. Just observing. Because the cracks were spreading. And once you start seeing them, you can't unsee. It happened on a Monday. Just another mundane, gray-skied start to the week, the kind of day that makes everything feel forgettable. She told me she had a late client meeting, part of the school's community engagement initiative. I didn't ask questions. I had stopped asking questions weeks ago, not because I wasn't curious, but because the answers were always neat little boxes wrapped in soft tones and avoidance. So I let her go, gave her the space she said she needed. After she left, I sat on the couch with my laptop open, pretending to work, but really watching the small dot on the GPS tracker I had installed in her car 2 nights earlier. I didn't want to be that guy, but I'd crossed the line between trust and survival long ago. I watched the dot crawl across the city map, slow, deliberate. Not toward the school. Not even in the direction of her supposed meeting. It stopped in a strip mall off the highway, next to a rundown Thai restaurant and a vape shop with blacked-out windows. The adjacent building, unmarked and unassuming, was the kind of place you don't notice unless you're looking for it. A 2-star motel with weekly rates and a neon vacancy sign flickering like it was trying to die. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling nothing. Not rage. Not heartbreak. Just clarity. A complete and total realignment of my reality. Everything she'd said, every moment I'd second-guessed myself, it all slid into place like puzzle pieces that had been forced until now. I didn't text her. Didn't call. I just sat, watching the dot remain still for over an hour. I imagined the curtains drawn shut. I imagined the lies she'd use later. I ran into an old friend. My phone died. It was just a misunderstanding. She wouldn't know that I already knew. She wouldn't sense the cold growing inside me, turning methodical, sharpening. She came home 3 hours later, hair slightly tousled, a faint redness along her jawline like she'd been kissed too hard. She dropped her purse by the door, exhaled dramatically, and said, "God, what a day." I was in the kitchen, peeling a mandarin. I didn't even look up. I nodded, offered a quiet, long meeting. She paused. "Yeah, ran late. You know how it is." I looked at her then, just briefly, just long enough to see her blink a little too slowly, lips pressed into a careful line. Her eyes darted away. She went upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen, chewing, tasting nothing. It wasn't until later that night that I saw the final piece. The real rupture. She was in the shower. Her phone buzzed, face up, left unattended on the nightstand. Normally, she guarded it like a limb. But she was rushing, maybe careless, maybe arrogant. Maybe she thought I was too blind or too loyal to look. The message flashed once, then again. 2 in a row. The name was saved as RK, admin. Something deliberately vague. Corporate. Innocuous. But the preview texts weren't corporate. The first said, "Still thinking about your thighs around me." The second, "That thing you whispered before you left, damn. Can't stop replaying it." I stared at the screen until it dimmed. My pulse didn't even rise. My hands didn't shake. I felt something deeper than anger. Something colder than betrayal. I felt my heart step away from her completely, like a man exiting a burning building and closing the door behind him. I didn't open the phone. Didn't scroll. I didn't need more. I had enough. Enough to understand that she wasn't just lost. She wasn't just confused. She had made a choice. Repeatedly. And now, I would too. I turned off the bedside lamp, climbed into bed, and waited for her to return. When she did, she slipped beneath the sheets like everything was normal. Her skin was still warm from the water. She curled slightly toward me, habitually, like muscle memory. I lay still, silent, eyes open in the dark. I knew then that our marriage was dead, but she didn't know that I knew. And I wouldn't show her. Not yet. Let her smile. Let her make plans. Let her think the walls are still intact. Because when I strike, I won't knock them down. I'll make her watch as they vanish around her, one brick at a time, until there's nothing left to stand on. No lies to cling to. No version of herself she can sell to anyone. I had just witnessed the end of my life with her, and she had no idea I was already designing the ruins. The day after I saw the messages, I smiled at her over breakfast and asked if she needed me to pick anything up for her from the store later. She said no, kissed me on the cheek like always, and headed out to volunteer at the school. I nodded, waved, and returned to my coffee like nothing was off, but my mind was already 3 hours ahead, playing out every possible contradiction she might feed me by evening. I didn't follow her. That would have been too obvious, too clumsy. Instead, I waited an hour, then called the school front desk under the guise of a parent wanting to know when the PTA's fundraising team would be meeting. The receptionist sounded confused. "The next planning meeting isn't until Thursday," she said. "There's nothing scheduled today." I thanked her, made a joke about getting my days mixed up, and hung up. That confirmed it. Lie number 1 of the day. I started collecting those like trophies. That afternoon, I used our shared tablet. The one she forgot was synced to her phone's cloud, and quietly scrolled through her deleted photo backups. Most were innocent, but a few were cropped oddly, saved briefly, then discarded. One showed the edge of a hotel nightstand. The other, a mirror selfie she'd clearly taken in a bathroom that wasn't ours, wearing a blouse I'd never seen before. I didn't confront her. Instead, I saved them silently to a hidden folder on a flash drive I kept in the garage tool cabinet. I began tracking patterns, her weekly routines, gas station charges, recurring midday errands that conveniently lined up with her gym buddies' off days. I checked the car's odometer once before and after a supposed short trip to the pharmacy. A 5-mile round trip somehow became 22. I asked her how traffic was when she got home. Crazy, she said, without blinking. Some detour near Maple. There were no detours on Maple. I knew. I drove it an hour later just to confirm. I started testing her in small, precise ways, planting questions I already knew the answer to. Did you end up calling your mom back today? Her pause was a second too long. Yeah, we talked for a while. Her mother had already texted me earlier, asking if everything was okay. Lauren's been quiet lately, she wrote. I haven't heard from her much. Another trophy. I fed her a fabricated story about my own schedule, an early meeting that didn't exist, and watched her plan a late, coffee date with Julie to fill the gap. I called Julie the next day, casually mentioned their time together, and heard the hesitation in her voice before she answered. Oh, yeah, right. That was yesterday. She sounded unsure. Julie's not a good liar. I didn't push her. I thanked her and let her go. Then I watched as her name disappeared from Lauren's call logs entirely, as if erasing the evidence could erase the truth. That weekend, I made up a fake work trip and told Lauren I'd be out of town for 2 nights. I didn't go anywhere. I stayed at a nearby hotel, watching our home security cameras remotely through my phone, all of which she thought were offline due to a firmware bug. I'd purposely claimed I hadn't fixed them yet. She bought it without question. The second night, around 8:45 p.m., I watched her leave the house in a rush, wearing that black sweater she always said made her feel dangerous. She returned 3 hours later, hair down, makeup smudged at the corners, carrying nothing. I noted the time. The following morning, she told me she stayed in, watched a documentary, and went to bed early. Relaxing night, she said. Lie number 17. I wrote it down. Every move she made, every excuse, every half-truth, I logged them. Not just for revenge, but for strategy. I didn't want to catch her. I wanted to corner her. To map the full depth of her deceit. To know her routine better than she did. I created a burner social media profile and followed her from it. She blocked it almost immediately, like she already knew what to look for, like someone had told her to watch for suspicious accounts. I checked who she was following, who she had recently unfollowed. One name stood out, RK. I ran it through every email I'd ever seen connected to her work or contacts. Eventually, I found an old Facebook message thread buried in her archive from 2 years ago with Ryan Keller, an old acquaintance from college. A guy I vaguely remembered from one of her stories as weird, intense, but good at making people feel seen. She used to say it dismissively. Clearly something changed. I found his LinkedIn. New city. New job. Same face. Same eyes. Same smirk. I downloaded a screenshot of their archive thread and saved it. I started collecting footage from our own doorbell camera too, using timestamps to cross-check nights she claimed to be alone. 2 nights had motion logs when no deliveries were scheduled and I was supposedly out. One showed her leaving, then returning exactly 73 minutes later, slightly staggering, holding her shoes in one hand like a teenager sneaking in past curfew. I didn't say a word. I made her favorite dinner that night. We laughed about an old movie. I kissed her goodnight like always. But inside, I was already gone. I was just a shadow now. A ghost moving through our house, taking notes, watching her perform her role while having no idea that the mask was already slipping. She thought she was clever. She thought she was safe. But every lie she told me now wasn't a shield. It was a breadcrumb. And I was following the trail with a smile. It happened at the school fundraiser gala, of all places. The annual event she had been obsessively planning for weeks, the one she said was her baby, where she insisted I wear a navy suit to match her deep blue dress because coordination makes us look connected. I played along, let her hook the pin on my lapel, smiled in photos, kissed her temple in front of the camera flashes like the loyal, loving husband everyone thought I was. The ballroom was packed with donors, board members, faculty. She flitted from table to table like she owned the place, shaking hands, laughing too loud, letting her fingertips linger on the arms of certain men just a second too long. But I waited. I'd orchestrated this night with the patience of a man watching dominoes line themselves up, one by one. Near the dessert station, beneath the soft lights and clinking glasses, I slipped the event coordinator a flash drive. I didn't need to say much. During her speech, just after the thank yous, he nodded, already briefed, already paid. I returned to our table, sipped my drink, and watched her circle back toward me, triumphant and radiant, her smile wide with the kind of pride that comes from lying without consequence. "Wish me luck," she whispered, straightening her neckline, and stepped up to the stage when her name was called. The applause was polite. The room settled. She began with a rehearsed speech about community and generosity, her voice dripping with performative gratitude. Then the screen behind her blinked once, twice, and changed. The video was grainy but clear, her entering the motel lobby, same black sweater, same smile she used when she wanted something. The timestamp was last Tuesday at 1:43 p.m. The next clip, her leaving, 2 hours later, with her hair pulled up and shirt half-buttoned, walking slightly behind a man whose face was fully visible. Ryan Keller. The room didn't erupt, it fell silent, like a switch had been pulled. She turned, mid-sentence, expecting to see the fundraising slide. Instead, she saw herself. Her eyes widened. Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. She turned to me. I held her gaze, expressionless. No anger. No drama. Just truth, displayed 20 feet wide behind her. She stumbled through the microphone's feedback, then tried to speak. "That's not. This is taken out of context." Murmurs began. A few chairs shifted. I didn't move. She stepped down from the stage, walking directly toward me, her heels clicking like gunshots in the silence. "That was months ago," she said under her breath, just loud enough for me to hear. "It wasn't like that. We were just talking." I didn't blink. She leaned in closer. "It was a mistake, okay?" I was confused. "You've been distant. You never ask about me anymore." What was I supposed to do? The room was still watching. She realized that and pulled back, tried to force a smile. "He's just being dramatic," she told the people near us. "This isn't what it looks like." The justification was weak. Her voice shook. Her confidence cracked when no one jumped to defend her. She tried again. "You weren't there for me. You don't even listen. This happened because you stopped seeing me." I let her flail. Let her search for a thread of control she no longer had. Then her tone shifted. Sarcasm. "So what? You're gonna humiliate me? You think this makes you look strong? You look pathetic." I looked at her then, not like a husband, not like a man scorned, but like a surgeon about to make the final, precise cut. My voice was calm. Steady. One sentence. "I don't need you to confess. I just needed everyone to see who you really are." Her face went pale. Not red with embarrassment. Not hot with shame. Pale, like blood had drained from her body. Her breath caught in her throat. She glanced around the room and saw not pity, not support, but distance. Recalculation. People pulling away. Whispers starting. Her image, her polished persona, was no longer hers to control. She opened her mouth again, but no words came. I didn't move. Didn't leave. I sat there, still as stone, watching her fall apart in the exact space where she once felt most adored. The air held the weight of something irreversible, something rotten finally exposed to daylight. And I let the silence do the rest. She followed me home that night, stormed in behind me like a fury in heels, slamming the front door hard enough to rattle the frame. I didn't look back. I poured a drink in the kitchen, calmly, ice cubes cracking in the glass like bones. "What the hell was that?" she demanded, voice sharp, frayed with panic. "You blindsided me in front of everyone I work with. What kind of man does that?" I didn't answer. I sipped slowly, savoring the silence more than the scotch. She paced the living room like a caged thing, ripping off her earrings, her tone shifting with every sentence, trying to find the right pitch that might still control me. "You smothered me," she spat, suddenly desperate. "You were always there, always watching. God, it was exhausting." I turned and looked at her for the first time since we entered the house. "And yet you still lied to my face every day." My voice was level, devoid of heat. That shook her. I could see it in the way she blinked, just a flicker too slow. She tried a new tactic. "I made a mistake, okay? I was lost. I needed something. Anything. to feel alive again. You don't get it, you never get it. You haven't touched me in months. I stepped forward, not aggressive, just close enough for her to feel the weight of my presence. I didn't touch you because I could smell someone else on your skin. Her mouth snapped shut. Her hands trembled. She spun away, tried another angle. You were boring, she hissed, low and venomous. Safe. Predictable. I wanted someone who made me feel wanted, not managed. I nodded slowly. And now you have what you wanted. Congratulations. She was shaking now, her hands clenched into fists. You think this makes you strong? Publicly humiliating your wife. You think you look like a man for doing that? I let the silence answer her. She took a breath, then went cold, her voice lowering to a bitter whisper. This wouldn't have happened if you were a real man. I tilted my head, like I was examining a strange, pitiful creature. And yet a real man was still too much for you to be honest with. That one hit deep. She staggered back a step, like the words had weight. Her face twisted, a storm of rage and shame fighting for dominance. I gave up everything for this life. For you. For us. And now you've burned it down like it meant nothing. I nodded again, slowly, deliberately. It meant nothing the second you started living a second life behind my back. Her voice cracked then. I loved you, she choked. You know that, right? Deep down, you know I loved you. I leaned in slightly, my tone like ice on glass. No, you loved what I gave you. Stability. Reputation. Image. You don't love anyone. Not really. Her lip trembled. For the first time, she had no words. Just silence. She dropped onto the couch, hands to her temples, muttering to herself like she could rewrite reality if she just spoke fast enough. This isn't fair. You don't understand what it's like to feel invisible. I stepped back, watching her unravel, her manipulations slipping through her fingers like sand. I was invisible to you the moment you decided I didn't matter anymore. She stood suddenly, her voice rising in volume now. So what, you're just done? That's it. You don't even care. I studied her carefully, the way you look at a stranger who used to be familiar. You lost the right to ask me that when you chose someone else's bed over my trust. Her face collapsed. She looked around the room like she was trying to find something to anchor herself to. I can fix this. We can fix this. I'll end it. I'll delete everything. Just talk to me. Please. Her voice had cracked completely now. Not anger. Fear. Real fear. Because she finally understood. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt anymore. I was done. And that was the one thing she hadn't planned for. She could fight a man in pain. She could manipulate guilt. She could spin betrayal into redemption. But she had no weapon against indifference. Nothing to use when the man standing across from her no longer gave a damn. I walked past her without another word, headed for the stairs. She didn't follow. She just stood there, breathing hard, caught in the wreckage of her own making. And in that silence, she finally understood what it feels like to lose everything without a single scream. The morning after her meltdown, while she slept curled into a pitiful ball on the edge of the bed we once shared, I got up, dressed quietly, and began the process of reclaiming everything she took for granted. There was no need for haste. Precision mattered more than speed. I started by backing up all digital evidence onto multiple encrypted drives. The video footage from the gala, the GPS logs, the text message screenshots, the email threads, the synced photo backups she'd forgotten still existed on our shared cloud. I organized them in a neat digital portfolio labeled Timeline of Deceit, with folders tagged by date and location. It wasn't for me. It was for anyone who'd ever ask why I left her in the dust. Then I moved to finances. The joint accounts were the first to go. I withdrew my half, transferred it to a personal account she couldn't access, then scheduled a meeting with our financial advisor to restructure our assets. She'd find out soon enough, when her debit card got declined at some overpriced cafe. I reviewed our credit card statements line by line, flagged every transaction that didn't add up, every brunch, gas station, and wellness center charge that masked her little escapades. I printed them, highlighted them, logged them into the evidence file. Next, I shut off her access to the car I paid for, my name, my title. With one call, I had the GPS disabled, remote access revoked, and the loan transferred back to my individual ownership. The spare key was locked at my desk. If she wanted to drive somewhere, she'd have to find another man to fund her detours. I then contacted our lawyer quietly, clinically. I filed for divorce, citing infidelity with overwhelming documentation. No drama. No drawn-out war. Just cold, legal annihilation. I filed for exclusive use of the house, temporary custody of our son, and immediate suspension of any shared financial obligations. I knew the judge would see the full picture once the evidence hit the docket. I planned the timing carefully. She'd receive the papers at work. Midday. Maximum disruption. Speaking of work, I sent a carefully worded email to her school's board of directors. No accusations. Just a Dropbox link titled Concerns Regarding Professional Conduct. Inside, footage of her affair with the track coach, timestamps that overlapped with work hours, and a polite note asking them to evaluate her use of school time and resources. I knew what that would do to her. Her position at the school was more than a job, it was her identity. She was the polished face of the parent-teacher community, the one who preached loyalty and values in every staff meeting. Now she'd be forced to sit in front of her peers, trying to explain how K-1 wasn't an abusive position. And I wasn't done. I wrote personal letters, handwritten, calm, polite, to her parents and her brother. Not vengeful, just honest. I explained what had happened, included enough evidence to erase any doubt, and thanked them for their role in our lives. I wanted them to see that I was walking away with dignity while she crawled through her own mess. Then came the friends, our inner circle. I invited them to a quiet get-together the following weekend, told her I needed space, that I was going to visit my brother. She didn't question it. I let her believe I was giving her air. But when our friends arrived, I showed them everything. No anger. Just truth. Eyes widened. Jaws clenched. A few apologized to me, said they had always suspected something. I didn't need their sympathy. I wanted their silence no longer. I told them the truth and let them decide who to believe. By the time she found out, the circle was already broken. The image she clung to, the supportive friends, the proud parents, the loving coworkers, was turning into a graveyard of burned bridges. And still, she had no idea how far it had gone. She was still playing defense, sending me long texts about therapy, about working through this, about how things got messy but don't have to end like this. Every message she sent became another log for the fire. I didn't respond. I didn't even open half of them. I wanted her to feel the vacuum, wanted her to sense that control had slipped fully and completely from her hands. The final step was the house. I removed her name from every utility, every subscription, every insurance plan. I changed the Wi-Fi password, reprogrammed the security system, replaced the locks. She wouldn't notice until the key stopped turning in the door, until the camera app stopped loading on her phone, until the thermostat said access denied. Every move I made was quiet, surgical, and irreversible. She thought she had time, thought I was still processing, still caught in the fog of heartbreak. She didn't realize that by the time she saw the ruins, I would already be gone, rebuilt, and untouchable. She destroyed a marriage with whispers and shadows. I dismantled her life with silence and facts. And I wasn't even done yet. It was her birthday, 40 guests, a private dining room, coordinated candles and wine pairings, a celebration she spent 3 weeks planning down to the floral centerpieces and music playlist. She told everyone it was going to be a night to remember, the kind of elegant evening that reminded people why she was the shining jewel of her social circle. She wore a white satin dress, low-cut but tasteful, with heels that clicked like clockwork across the marble floors. She kissed people on the cheek, made her rounds like a politician in stilettos, and even tried to slide her arm around mine when I arrived 15 minutes late, calmly, deliberately. I let her touch me, let her smile for the pictures. Everyone noticed. Everyone watched. But not a single person smiled back the way they used to. Her best friend Olivia was already seated at the head table, stone-faced, lips tight. Her parents sat stiffly beside each other, not speaking to her, eyes on the cutlery. Her brother barely acknowledged her hug. Still, she carried on, laughing too loud, telling stories that no one responded to, refilling her own wine glass faster than anyone else. She didn't notice that the only people asking questions were strangers. The ones who knew her already had the answers. Dinner passed in a slow, tense hum, the kind of energy that feels like pressure before a storm. Then came the toast. She stood up, glass in hand, and began with some rehearsed nonsense about resilience, about love, about gratitude. "I've been through a lot this year," she said, voice trembling slightly, "and I just want to say how lucky I am to be surrounded by people who know my heart." Her parents didn't clap. Olivia looked down. A few polite chuckles fluttered in and died quickly. She glanced at me, maybe expecting a nod of approval, a smile, a lifeline. I gave her nothing. I remained seated, back straight, eyes locked on hers. That's when it happened. My cue was a signal to the restaurant staff, a subtle nod I'd arranged earlier. The lights dimmed. A projector turned on, casting a perfect, high-definition rectangle across the back wall. Her expression froze. The screen lit up with a slideshow. At first, it looked like birthday photos, smiling, curated images of her past year. But then, mid-scroll, the photos changed. Screenshots of her messages to Ryan. The timestamps, the saved images. Then video footage, the hotel entrance, her slipping into a room beside him. Audio clips, spliced together. Her breathless voice saying, "Don't worry, he never asks questions," and, "I wish I could wake up next to you instead." The silence in the room was immediate. Heavy. Smothering. Her smile evaporated. Her hand dropped the champagne glass, and it shattered on the floor. "Turn it off," she muttered, voice too soft to matter. "Turn it off." She shouted this time, but no one moved. The manager stood near the door, as instructed, watching her but making no move to help. Her father stood slowly and walked out without a word. Her mother followed, face unreadable. Olivia turned to me, nodded once in silent solidarity, and stood as well. A few guests started whispering, others stared at their plates. Her brother stood and muttered, "Jesus Christ," before walking out. The screen faded to black. She stood alone in the center of the room, panting, eyes wild, turning to me like I had just lit the match to her life. "You bastard. You set me up." Her voice cracked, hysteria breaking through the cracks of her carefully constructed persona. "You did this to me. You wanted to ruin me." She stepped toward me, desperate. "We could have fixed this. Why would you do this here?" I didn't answer. I didn't flinch. I just watched. And that's what finally broke her. "Say something," she screamed. "Say something, damn you." Her voice shrieked through the room, but no one responded. I stood there like a mirror, calm, still, emotionless, and let her see herself reflected for the first time. She collapsed into a chair, head in her hands, sobbing now, makeup streaking, shoulders shaking. No one offered her a napkin. No one touched her. The woman who had once orchestrated every room, owned every conversation, now sat at the center of it all, alone, broken, exposed. I didn't walk away. I didn't comfort her. I simply remained in place, watching her as the lies peeled off layer by layer, as the mask fell completely. She looked up one last time and saw me still there, untouched, unchanged. That's when the fear set in. Not fear of punishment. Fear of insignificance. Fear that I no longer cared. And in that moment, she knew she hadn't just lost me, she'd lost everything. The second confrontation wasn't planned, it exploded. 2 days after the birthday fallout, at her parents' house, where they had called a family conversation to discuss the situation. I arrived exactly on time. She was already there, pacing in the living room, trying to control the room like she used to, like she still believed she could. Her mother sat stiff on the couch, eyes cold, lips tight. Her father stared out the window, arms crossed, not saying a word. My sister had come too, arms folded, expression unreadable but burning with quiet fury. I didn't want this to be a performance, but she made it one. The second I stepped through the door, she launched. "So you're proud of yourself?" she snapped, eyes wild. "That video stunt? That little show you put on? You humiliated me in front of everyone. For what? To look like the bigger man?" I closed the door behind me, stepped into the room, and said nothing. Just stared. She was already unraveling. "I made a mistake. A mistake. But you've turned this into some twisted campaign to destroy me. You think that makes you righteous? You think this is justice?" I finally spoke, calm but sharp. "Justice would have been letting everyone believe your version of our life." I gave them the truth. "If it humiliated you, that's on you." Her voice cracked, louder now. "Oh, please. You don't care about truth. You care about control. You always have. You love being the quiet one, the stable one, because it made you feel superior. But you weren't perfect. You weren't even present." My sister stepped forward. "He was present every single day. You just stopped seeing him." Lauren turned on her. "Of course you take his side. You've always hated me." "No," my sister said. "I trusted you. And you made me look like a fool for defending you all these years." Her mom finally spoke, low and cutting. "You lied to everyone, Lauren. You used our love to hide what you were doing. How do you think that makes us look?" Lauren's face paled. "So what? You're all against me now? You're all just going to pretend I'm some kind of monster?" "You did that yourself," I said. "You begged for loyalty and gave none. You wore the victim's mask while sneaking out the back door. You want to talk about mistakes? Fine. Let's talk about how you told Ryan you felt alive for the first time, while I was at my father's funeral. Let's talk about that. A gasp from her mother. My sister's jaw dropped. That's not true, Lauren said, voice shrill. You're making that up. It's in the messages. I cut her off. I have the timestamp. I was holding my father's urn while you were texting another man about what you wanted to do to him in a hotel room. Stop it, she screamed. Just stop. You're not some saint. You're boring. You're ice. You drain the life out of everything. Do you know how hard it was to live with someone who made every day feel like a dead end? My voice dropped low, deadly calm. And yet you clung to me for every bill, every decision, every ounce of security. You wanted the house, the car, the image, but never the man. You didn't want a partner. You wanted a platform to look perfect. You want perfect? She shrieked. You want to talk about platforms? You orchestrated a takedown like I was some public figure. You're sick. You're vengeful. I stepped closer, just enough to make her breath catch. No. I just stopped protecting a liar. And you're not being punished, you're just being seen. That's when the door opened. Ryan. He hadn't expected company. He paused, frozen in the doorway like a man who just walked into a courtroom, not a house. Her head snapped toward him. What are you doing here? You texted me to come talk, he muttered. I didn't know. His eyes met mine and dropped immediately. My sister scoffed. This him. Get out, her mother said to him, eyes burning. Now. He mumbled something and backed out like a coward, not saying a word to Lauren. She spun around, full of fire, but there was no one left on her side. She looked at me, tears now, voice smaller. You loved me once. Doesn't that matter? Doesn't any of it matter? It did, I said, until you buried it under lies and called it growth. I can't breathe, she muttered. I can't believe this is happening. You should, her father said, finally turning. This is what happens when masks fall off. And in that moment, surrounded by the people who once propped her up, she collapsed, not to the floor, but inward. Her shoulders sank. Her face crumbled. There were no more words. No more weapons. Just silence, heavy and final. I turned, walked toward the door, and as I passed her, I didn't even look back. I didn't need to. The sound of her sobbing behind me was enough. She unraveled fast after that day, faster than I thought someone like her could. The woman who once strutted through PTA meetings and wine clubs with practiced poise suddenly couldn't show her face in a grocery store without someone whispering. She tried to hold on at first, pretended like nothing had changed, posted a filtered photo with a hollow caption about new beginnings and growing through pain, but no one bit. Her likes vanished. Her comments dried up. Even her inner circle, those women she once laughed with while sipping overpriced Chardonnay, disappeared overnight. They blocked her, ghosted her, refused to reply to her pleas for just a quick chat. Word had spread. Not by me. I never said a thing after the gala. I didn't need to. The truth was its own wildfire. Her reputation at the school crumbled in days. The board launched a quiet review into her conduct, found more than they expected, conflicts of interest, missing hours, PTA funds used for wellness retreats that now looked a lot more like getaway covers. Her contract wasn't renewed. They didn't fire her publicly. They didn't need to. They just stopped returning her emails, and one day she showed up to a locked office and an empty desk. Her name was removed from the school site like it had never existed. Ryan? He vanished as fast as he arrived. The second the light hit them, he folded. Blocked her number. Removed her from socials. Told a mutual friend he had no idea it was that serious. Classic. She had no fallback plan. No safety net. She sold the car within a month. Moved out of her rental place when she couldn't keep up with the bills. Last I heard, she was in some small town a few hours north, working at a boutique fitness shop where no one knows her name and no one cares who she used to be. Her social media went dark. Her face, once the center of 100 smiling couple photos, now just a gray icon beside a username that hadn't been updated in months. And then came the messages. First it was one, short and desperate. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I'm still trying to understand what I did to become this person. Then another. I still love you. Every day. I think I always will. Then the long ones. Rambling confessions sent at 2:13 a.m., probably from the floor of a studio apartment with no curtains, typing through tears. I was scared. You were so calm all the time, I didn't know how to ask you for what I needed. I messed up. I destroyed us. But I still dream about the way you used to look at me. Please, just say something. Anything. I didn't respond. Not at first. But eventually she came to my door. A Sunday morning, hair tied back, eyes swollen, clutching a paper coffee cup like it could keep her from collapsing. She looked like a shadow. Not the woman I married. Not the woman who betrayed me. Just a stranger. "I'm not here to fight," she said, voice hoarse. "I just needed to see you. One more time. Just to say I'm sorry. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I raised a hand." She stopped. I stepped forward, close enough to look her in the eyes. And then I said it, quiet, final. "You died the day you chose him." Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but nothing came out. She stood there, trembling, breath shallow, and in that silence, she realized I meant it. That I wasn't angry. I wasn't mourning. I was already gone. I shut the door. No slam. No words. Just the sound of something ending. A clean cut. And I didn't look back. I never do. She had asked once, in one of her late-night messages, "Do you ever miss the life we had?" And now, standing in the quiet of my home, in a life rebuilt on truth and peace, I finally had the answer. No. Not for a second. Not even a breath. She thought love was permanent. That no matter what she did, I'd always be there, some dim light waiting for her to come back. She didn't realize that even the most patient man has a limit. That sometimes, the strongest revenge isn't rage. It's absence. So I ask you this. If it had been your wife, what would you have done?